Welcome to Breaking Silos, a podcast that shines a light on the incredible partnerships happening across campuses every day. I'm your host, Shane Baglini from Muhlenberg College. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher ed marketing, enrollment management, student affairs, campus leadership, and more. Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher education professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. Welcome to another special episode of Breaking Silos here live in Raleigh from Engage Summit 2024. I am lucky to be joined by a fellow podcaster and probably much more well-known podcaster than me, Bart Caylor. Bart is the president and founder of Caylor Solutions and host of the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. Bart, thanks so much for your time.
Privileged to be here. Really enjoy talking with you today.
Likewise. So Bart, we were talking about silos yesterday.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were talking about silos yesterday. And you know, you, with your podcast and Caylor Solutions, have had conversations with a plethora of a who's who of higher ed marketers. And so I'm curious from your conversations, both with Caylor Solutions and the podcast, your general sense of why higher ed is so siloed and some examples of either good or bad examples of marketers kind of combating those silos.
Yeah, it's like a nice scene from my Midwest home, seeing as many silos as are out there. But it's one of those things that I think is not necessarily unique to higher ed, but it gets amplified and it gets worse in higher ed because I think that opinions are a little bit stronger in higher ed. So yeah, I think that you typically will have silos kind of based in the departments and you know, whether it's colleges within the university or even if it's just like marketing versus enrollment or enrollment versus advancement or faculty versus whomever. I mean, you're going to have those silos. And so I think that, you know, in my times of, like you said, talking to people on the higher ed marketer and how they address that, the challenge is that as marketers, we have to we're serving the entire university. And so we have to navigate and be able to pop in and out of those silos if indeed they exist, and they do exist. And so I think a lot of things, what I've learned, not only in the podcast, but in my own experience of, you know, doing higher ed marketing for, you know, nearly 30 years and then having also corporate experience, there's I would say some political skills are needed sometimes when you're dealing with silos.
Yeah, I was just telling Eddie earlier that I feel like one of the most underrated skills for a marketer is being a politician.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I would amplify that and say, indeed. And I think that sometimes people get confused on what the word politician means. They think it means, you have to go out and schmooze and kiss babies and all that kind of stuff. No, it means that you have to understand the room and you need to read the room and you need to be able to understand who are naturally going to be against what you're trying to do and who are the people that are in your corner, and being able to work that to the advantage of the institution, which is usually what marketing needs to do. Is you need to do things that are going to be for the good of the institution when sometimes people don't understand that and they want it for the good of their particular department.
Yeah. So what advice, Bart, based on your experience, what advice would you have, let's say for somebody more junior at an institution, right, that is looking to collaborate on a project that they're leading, but maybe they feel like they don't have the kind of the authority or the pull to do so. Any advice for that type of person?
Well, one thing I always like to tell people, and I actually did this today, I had a client meeting and I had to remind the director of marketing and the vice president of marketing, you guys are the experts of marketing. So you're going to go into the room, at the end of the day, the call is yours and the president's. And so I think that sometimes, even as a junior marketer, I think that you wear the badge of marketing. I remember one of my summer jobs one time was at this campground, and I was supposed to, believe it or not, it was a church campground, and all these RVs would come in for this convention, and you know, I was in charge of security. I was in charge of checking them in, but I had to put the security hat on and have like a little flashlight. That made me the authority. And so I remember having to walk out. Somebody was arguing about how far their trailer was over the lot line. I had to go out with my little security hat and my flashlight and settle the battle as a 17-year-old. But I didn't have the authority without wearing that stinking hat that said security. And I think that that's what people need to understand, is that You are a marketer, and you serve the marketing of the institution, marketing and communications. And so you have to feel that that alone gives you some authority to be able to say, we think this is what's best. And so one piece of advice that I would suggest a lot of marketers listen to, even if you're young or you've seasoned, is go and have people react against what you're presenting rather than asking them what they want or asking them what they think. Because if you leave it open-ended and you walk in, and I do this a lot of times with my websites, we often start a website conversation. It's important to make sure that we have conversations with all the stakeholders, but I never go in and say, what do you want on the website? Because they will tell me, and I will have to tell them, no, we are not going to do that. It's a lot easier conversation to say, why do you love teaching at this institution? What gets you excited about telling others about this institution? You get the conversation around their experience and their emotion around the brand rather than their opinion about what they should do from a marketing standpoint, because they're not qualified to make those decisions. And so I always like to make sure that I never ask someone's, what they wish for, what they want, or what do you think? I try to really make sure that any conversations that I have are framed within, I'm presenting this to you. I need you to give me your reaction to it from an emotional standpoint that I will weigh in with everything else, as opposed to just saying, I will see if I can get your feature or your element to be a part of it.
Yeah, and I think based on some of the conversations I've had this week and on the show, one of the key things there is making sure that people that you're talking to feel like their opinion is valued and certainly taking their opinion in, but also, like you just said, indicating that we're asking for your feedback, your thoughts, and like you just said, weighing that into the whole thing, but making people feel like they're a part of the process.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, like when you do a major work like a website, or let's say you're doing an enrollment campaign or tagline or branding, you do want to get people's input, and you do want people to feel like they had a voice at the table. But the way that you position the questions and the way that you present the information and the way that you ask them to react rather than being proactive, you can control and guide that a lot better as a professional marketer than just taking everybody's thoughts and trying to Frankenstein something together.
Yeah. So Bart, in your experience, you've talked to people, I think you described it earlier as micro colleges with really small enrollments, and then you talked to the flagship Goliaths. Any examples that jump to your mind about somebody that's done this particularly well and sort of rallied input and rallied the support around campus on a project or just in general? Any examples that you can highlight?
I think some of it, I can certainly give you some examples of some of the things that I've done. And I've mentioned that earlier. As I mentioned, I was talking to a group this morning and we're working on the enrollment campaign. We've got a new positioning statement, and the first round didn't go so well. The committee didn't like it. So they came back and said, could you give us some other ideas? And so rather than just giving them 3 more options of the 3 that we did before, I had my team stop, and we actually, took the one idea that the committee came back with that liked, and we developed out iterations and similar things like it. And when we were done today, and I intentionally said, we only want the director of marketing, the VP of marketing to come back to us to have a conversation, and we want to collaborate with them. So I indicated to them that this was going to be a collaborative meeting rather than us presenting our recommendations. And so that alone right there, I think, is a political move. If you're internally being able to have a group of people to say, we're going to collaborate on this and we want your input on where we're headed, as opposed to presenting, here's option 1, 2, or 3. So that's the first thing. But then after our meeting, it was really positive. They were like, we love this. Can we remove this one and maybe change these 2? And we'd like to take all these 3 pages of notes with all the 37 options and iterations. We'd like to take that back to the committee and get their input. And I said, that's great. But before you do that, 1, recognize that you guys are the final authority of the president. So with that in mind, I would probably preview this with the president. Let's say, hey, we just want to get your feedback on this. This is where we're going. You're a part of the committee. We just wanted to give you the deference that you are the president, so you need to see this. Partly that gets him to buy in and where the marketing needs to go. Mm-hmm. So that was an important point that I was pointing out to them. And then secondly, I said, if there are other people on the committee that are going to be assets for you to be able to help with the rest of the committee, preview that with them as well. Don't just throw it over the wall, but actually have conversations that you can kind of help people, navigate that together. And it's not like you're hiding behind closed doors and things like that. You're trying to politically navigate the situation. So that's an example from my own work. But I think on the podcast, I've always been impressed with Purdue University. I mean, they've been ranked as one of the top brands in the world, the only higher ed institution. And it's not because of not doing things exactly what we're talking about. I mean, it doesn't hurt to have a president who, was a former governor, and he was kind of known for no nonsense. I mean, Purdue's had, 14 years of no growth in their tuition. So they've had a tuition freeze for 14 years. They've balanced their budgets. They've done everything right. And they've kind of emerged as this global, brand leader. They made tough decisions and took the consequences. We were one of the first schools that came out in April of 2020 that says they're coming back to school. And they did. And they put it around, and people were screaming at them saying, this is insane. But they took risks. And so I think a lot of it comes down to being courageous in what you're doing and knowing what's right and going out and doing it, and, and having your back covered by your administration, your cabinet. But they have to be willing to be courageous as well. And I think that's really where things start to change.
Yeah. And so that's a perfect segue to what I wanted to ask you about next. Talk about why it's so important for people in leadership positions on campus. Could be the president, could be the VP of marketing, could be somebody at the cabinet level. One of the themes that comes up a lot on my show is leading collaboration from the top of the organization has a real impact on, the trickle down effect of that. What are your thoughts on that in general, and why is it so important for the leadership of the institution to be really the lead kind of collaborators?
I think it comes a lot down to authority and the power of authority. I think sometimes we don't recognize, even amongst ourselves and our own teams, what authority can do. I mean, even in our own small marketing teams, if you are a VP of marketing or director of marketing, you have authority on those who report to you. And, certainly we all know the memes that we've seen with the boss versus leader stuff on LinkedIn and stuff. But I think sometimes we recognize that we want to be leaders, but sometimes being leaders also means being the authority and being willing to accept that authority and being able to be courageous in the decisions and deal with the outcome. I mean, on a college campus and anywhere, even in your own relationships with your spouse or your family, there's going to be conflict. And how people navigate conflict and how people respect each other in the conflict is what takes courageous leadership, and it's what takes authority. And again, I'm not saying you play the authority card and just, ignore everybody else, but it does take that ability to be collaborative, but knowing that part of the way that we can be collaborative in the best interest for everybody is doing that with the authority already built in. And so that's why I think so many times it's important for you as marketers to make sure that your president and your cabinet understand the reasons and the whys of what you're doing, because oftentimes marketing is the first one on the chopping block when times get tough. But if they understand why we have this budget for digital marketing, why we're doing this, why we think we need to do a new website, and we can talk about the ROI and the investment of the marketing as opposed to the cost of the marketing, that's going to start getting a lot of your leadership and therein their authority to help navigate the waters and deal with the conflict that's naturally going to come. Because as marketers, sometimes we talk about the 4 Ps, and one of the Ps is product. A lot of times schools don't allow marketers to have a say on the development of new programs or the sunsetting of programs. And that's a little bit unique to higher ed, because there's a little bit of, the faculty card involved and tenure and other things like that are harder to navigate. But I hate to say it, but sometimes some of the schools that are maybe listening to this, you don't have any other choice but to do things differently than the way you've done it before, because there's a lot of headwinds coming, and there's going to be, I was joking with somebody the other day, it seems like 1 per week now in school closings. And so it's not the time for us to be timid and hold back. It's the time for us to be courageous.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And yeah, the courageous piece of things, right? And people will follow the lead, pun intended. People will follow if the leadership of the institution is setting that example. So I think that's spot on. So Bart, we're at an AI conference, so I'd be remiss if I did not ask you.
People always blame you for being artificial intelligence, but I'm here.
Well, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you an AI related question. I'm trying to tie it into collaboration, but
what are some ways that you see AI in general, maybe not in like allowing us to collaborate more closely, but maybe letting marketers sort of educate their institutions a little bit better on what it is that we do, and giving them some tangible things to look at.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would think about is just maybe developing a prompt or even a custom GPT that you actually have set up the fact that I am in a higher education institution. This is who I'm talking to. Upload their CVs and say, how can I best present this marketing to this faculty member or this committee, and actually give it some context and allow it to help you think through it. Because, I mean, keep in mind, ChatGPT is a lot more than just being able to write a blog post. I mean, it's got some built-in knowledge. It's got some knowledge of empathy, of personalities, of the best of psychology. And so you could even just say, give it a prompt like, acting as a psychological coach for this particular team. Help me put together and craft the best way to help explain this hard decision that I need to make, that I want to present to the team to get their support. And you can start having a conversation with it and say, ask me as many questions as you need to put that together. And it might say, well, tell me about the team members. Tell me about who they are. What authority do they have? What are their wants and desires? It'll walk you through that. And at the end of that conversation, and again, it's ChatGPT, it needs to be a conversation. At the end of that time you invest with it, you'll be better prepared to walk in. And you're not going to go in and print that out and read it to the group, but it's going to give you have to treat it more like it's a coach. Like if you had somebody that knew everything about your institution, that was just an outside observer that could give you some feedback, that's what you can use artificial intelligence for.
Yeah, I mean, there's even in the last 2 days, there's just so many uses for AI outside of what you just write me a blog post. Brian Piper, before, I could see people's heads exploding in the crowd when he showed a video translating his speech into 6 different languages in real time, and people were like, "What?" There's just so much you can do with it, and certainly, Bart, you're one of the leading voices in the space. So I encourage people to listen to you and read about what you're doing. But speaking of reading, you've also written a book that I'm going to have you sign in a second after we're done recording. Tell us about the book and where people can find it.
Yeah, so the book is called Chasing Mission Fit. It's the whole idea of being able to fill your institution with students that are going to succeed. And so the premise of it was I had a lot of, and we talked earlier about this idea of micro colleges that are under 500 students. And they would come to me and say, hey, we need to do this. And I put together a plan for them. And they're like, we just don't have the budget to hire you. And I was like, well, I really wish I could give them something that would help them understand the way I approach marketing. And so I was encouraged to kind of write that all down. And so we did. And it just kind of is a little bit of, a lot of people call it a roadmap. I know Jamie Hutt uses that word, or 2 others, of just a roadmap for institutions on how to make sure that you can articulate your institution so that the students who are best going to be interested in your students, the students will be mission fit, that they can see that and understand it, discover and succeed. And so it's a little bit of, a lot of common sense, but it's also a lot of just, specific ways of thinking differently, being able to look at, things like your website and content and lead generation, kind of those 3 pillars of things that you need to be doing, and being okay and courageous to be able to say, I'm sorry, board, we don't need 2 more billboards. We need to do this because of this reason. And also being willing to be creative and doing like guerrilla marketing. And so we kind of outline all of that. And so, yeah, it's been well received. I've been a little bit surprised and encouraged that it's been so well received, but it's a little bit of a labor of love.
Yeah, and it's a great tool. It's a great resource, and you can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Bart's website.
I even saw it on Walmart the other day. So.
Wow. And so Bart, thanks for your time at the conference, and really enjoyed chatting with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Breaking Silos is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea, and feature a selection of the industry best as your host. Learn from Dave Cabilds, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and many more of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.